Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
I was 13 the first time I realized that fairness wasn't a thing in our house. It was more like a nice story parents told when they needed you to do something you didn't want to do. The thing is, I didn't grow up in some loud, chaotic household full of screaming or broken things. No, it was quiet. Civil. On the surface, our family looked like the kind that sent out matching holiday cards with everyone wearing white shirts and fake smiles. My mom kept the kitchen clean enough to eat off the floor. My dad worked a union job at the plant until his back gave out, and my younger brother, Eric, well, he was the shining light, the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong, even when he absolutely did. I learned early that my job wasn't to be loved loudly. It was to be useful. The responsible one. The daughter who could fold a fitted sheet by age 10, who did her own laundry without being asked, who got straight A's not for praise, but because disappointing anyone felt like a crime. When Eric flooded the basement by jamming a sock into the utility sink to see what would happen, my mom screamed at me for not keeping an eye on him. I was 11. He was 8. But she said I was older, I should have known better. That phrase would follow me for the next 3 decades like a bitter perfume. You're older. You should know better. Eric, on the other hand, knew how to play them like a fiddle. He could break a window and blame the wind, and Mom would nod like it made perfect sense. Dad would shrug and say, "Boys will be boys," and then hand him $20 to get ice cream. When I once came home 10 minutes late from the library, my mom didn't speak to me for a day and a half. It wasn't punishment, it was guilt warfare, the kind that makes you doubt your own worth until you start offering apologies for breathing too loud. It wasn't just childhood either. It bled into everything. When I graduated nursing school with a full-ride scholarship, my mom said, "Well, of course you did. You've always been the serious one. No congratulations. No dinner." When Eric barely finished community college, they threw a backyard party with balloons and a cooler full of beer like he'd just returned from war. I stood there holding a plate of undercooked ribs, watching my mother laugh at his dumb jokes, and I knew then what I'd known since I was 10. Some kids get love. Others get responsibility. As we got older, things didn't shift the way they're supposed to. You know how they say time evens things out? That siblings grow into themselves and parents finally start seeing their kids for who they are, not just who they were? Yeah, that never happened. If anything, it got worse. By the time we were both in our 40s, I was still getting calls to help your brother out when he fell behind on rent or needed help getting the kids to school. Eric had 3 kids with 2 different women, and neither relationship had lasted more than 5 years, but Mom always said he was just going through a rough patch, even though that patch had stretched out over a decade. I didn't mind helping, not at first. There's a part of you, the eldest daughter part, that just does it out of reflex. You put your life on hold because someone else's is burning down again. But somewhere along the way, it started to eat at me. Especially when I realized no one ever thought to ask how I was doing. When I got divorced, my mom didn't come stay with me or even send flowers. She said, "Well, at least you don't have kids involved," and that was the end of it. When Eric's second girlfriend walked out and took half his stuff, Mom practically moved in for 2 weeks and called me 3 times a day for updates on how he was coping. So when the latest family group text lit up one Thursday night with beach emojis and excited chatter, I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe Eric was taking his kids on a trip and Mom was just tagging along to supervise. But then I saw the reservation. 5-star resort. Ocean view suite. Spa packages. Paid for by my mother. And there was no mention of me. No invitation. No explanation. Just digital confetti flying across the screen while they made dinner plans for restaurants I'd never heard of in a city I'd never been to. I waited a full day before I said anything. I wasn't trying to make it dramatic. I just wanted to hear what she'd say, if she'd even bother coming up with an excuse. So I called her, kept my voice light, asked how things were going. She was cheerful, relaxed, practically glowing through the phone. When I asked about the trip, she paused just a beat too long. And then she said it soft, almost like a lullaby, "You'll understand when you're older." That sentence landed like a slow slap. I was 46. Older than both my parents had been when they divorced. Older than she was when she first got cancer. Older than when she told me at 15 that I needed to grow up faster because life isn't fair and someone has to be the adult. And now, at 46, I'm supposed to wait longer to understand why my little brother still gets treated like royalty while I get handed the emotional leftovers? I didn't argue. Didn't cry. Didn't say a word. Just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear and my eyes locked on the one framed photo I still kept on the bookshelf. The last family photo where we all smiled like things were okay. Taken during a Thanksgiving that ended with me doing the dishes alone while Eric passed out on the couch. When she hung up, I stayed sitting there. My hand moved to the table without thinking. I picked up the spare house key, hers, not mine. I set it on the wood. And just stared at it. Some people blow up. Some scream. Some start fights or post cryptic messages on Facebook. Not me. I just started planning. Quietly. Slowly. Like someone packing a parachute before the jump. And I never told them I was about to vanish. Not even once. There's something incredibly sobering about the moment you realize your silence has never been misunderstood, never been misinterpreted as peace or contentment or even strength. It's simply been convenient for other people. A background hum that they could ignore while they turned up the volume on everything and everyone else. That next morning, after that soft, razor-edged sentence, "You'll understand when you're older," rang out like a bell tolling the death of whatever scraps of closeness I still believed we had. I didn't feel rage the way I used to when I was younger. When I still had that desperate instinct to prove myself, to explain why I deserved just a sliver of the consideration that Eric had been drowning in his entire life. No, what I felt was colder, quieter, and somehow heavier. It was clarity. It was the final click of the last puzzle piece that had been upside down for years. And once it snapped into place, I saw everything exactly as it was. The day went by in slow motion, not because I didn't have things to do. I had laundry piling up, patients to follow up with at the clinic, groceries that weren't going to buy themselves. But because every movement felt like it existed inside a separate room of my mind, while another part of me, the real part, stood at the window of that childhood house, watching the same tired pattern unfold one more time. Eric had asked Mom for help again, and she'd leapt at the opportunity to play savior. This time it was a resort. Not a motel. Not a long weekend in the next state over. A full-blown 5-star vacation with room service, ocean views, cabanas, and that passive-aggressive gesture of family bonding that included everyone but the one person who had always shown up. Me. And the truth was, it wasn't just about the trip. It never really is it? These things, these slights, these exclusions, they're just the final stitch in a much bigger, much older quilt that's been suffocating you for years. The trip was just the moment I realized that quilt didn't have my name on it, and it never had. I didn't even feel the need to ask for an explanation, because deep down, I already knew. I'd always been easy to leave out because I never made it difficult. I didn't throw tantrums or demand things. I handled my own problems. I was strong, or at least, I played strong so well that eventually they stopped checking if the act was still going. That evening, while folding towels and listening to the hum of the dishwasher, I thought about the dozens of small ways I'd been erased over the years. Birthdays that went forgotten, apologies that never came, sacrifices that were brushed off as what you do when you care about your family. I thought about the time Eric wrecked my car when we were in our 20s, and instead of making him pay, Mom just said, "He didn't mean to, honey. That boy's got a good heart." I paid the deductible, took the bus to work for a week, and said nothing. Always nothing. And the thing that made me ache the most wasn't even the pain, it was the shame. The shame that I'd let it go on for so long. That I'd swallowed every bitter mouthful of being the afterthought because I thought being reliable was the same thing as being valued. But it isn't. Being reliable means they trust you not to leave. Being valued means they want you to stay. That's not the same thing. Around 9 o'clock, I made myself a cup of tea, not wine, not whiskey, just tea, because I needed a clear head. I sat at the dining table and laid out a piece of paper in front of me. I didn't even realize I was making a list until I'd written the words, what I gave, at the top of the left column and what I got on the right. I didn't fill it out like a dramatic journal entry. I just listed facts. Straight, cold facts. On one side, co-signed a car loan for Eric in my 30s. Took mom to chemo every Friday for 2 years. Babysat his kids for 3 Christmases so he could get his head right. Covered rent once when dad was between jobs. On the other side, nothing. A thank you card once. A mug from Eric that said best and like I'd won a participation award in someone else's game. A half-hearted "you know we love you" at Thanksgiving that always felt like a line from a sitcom, not something real. I sat there looking at that list for a long time. The paper was small, but the weight of it made my chest ache like I'd been holding my breath for 20 years. And the worst part? I knew if I gave them the chance to explain, they'd twist it like they always did. They'd say I was being dramatic. They'd say I misunderstood. They'd say, it wasn't about you, as if I was just collateral damage in their ongoing love affair with Eric's potential. So I didn't give them the chance. Instead, I got up, took that spare key from the hook by the door, the one mom had left years ago in case of emergencies, and I placed it gently on the kitchen table. Not because I wanted her to see it and think I was making a statement. I didn't care if she noticed. I just wanted it out of my space, like everything else I was about to walk away from. But here's the thing that people don't talk about when it comes to family betrayal: it doesn't explode. It decays. It rots quietly in the corners while everyone smiles and pretends not to smell it. And the moment you decide to leave, there's this eerie calm that settles over you, because you've already been grieving them for years. You just didn't know that grief had a name until now. So I didn't pack a bag that night. I didn't cry or rage or call up a friend to vent. I just sat in my chair, tea going cold, and let the truth settle into my bones like a slow frost. I wasn't part of the picture. I never had been. I'd just been holding the camera the whole damn time. And this time, I was done taking their photograph. There's a moment, somewhere between the decision to leave and the act itself, when your body stops functioning out of habit and starts moving with quiet precision, a kind of internal choreography that feels both alien and intimate, as if every bone in you has already memorized the steps before your mind has even caught up. I woke up the next morning with no alarm, no rush, no frantic panic or wild thoughts, just a strange stillness in my chest, a numb calm, as if the part of me that used to ache for their attention had finally gone silent. Not because it found peace, but because it simply gave up asking. And for the first time in years, maybe decades, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an answer. The house was still. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black and bitter, just how I used to drink it when I worked overnight shifts and had no time for cream or sentimentality. I stood at the window, watching a thin drizzle of rain streak down the glass, and I thought about how many storms I had weathered for people who never noticed when I was the one getting soaked. My mother had left a voicemail around midnight, bright, chirpy, almost condescending in its artificial warmth, telling me they'd be flying out the next morning, that she hoped I'd understand the trip wasn't personal, that it had just worked out that way, and maybe I could come next time if things were calmer. She didn't ask if I was free, or if I wanted to go, or if it hurt not to be invited. She didn't even pause to consider that, in all the ways that mattered, I had already left years ago, even if I hadn't moved yet. I didn't listen to the whole message. I didn't need to. I'd heard some version of it all my life, her voice coated with that familiar blend of guilt and justification, like someone rehearsing an apology that doesn't belong to them. So I deleted it. No ceremony, no hesitation. Just a clean swipe and a clearer mind. It's a strange thing, packing a life you've built in service to others. The apartment I lived in wasn't grand or cluttered, but every object in it felt soaked in compromise. The couch I chose because it was practical, the dishes I kept because Mom likes those when she visits, the spare bedroom I never filled because I was always on call to help with Eric's kids, it all reeked of a life paused for someone else's comfort. So I didn't pack it all. I didn't even pack most of it. I took what was mine, not what I had inherited, not what had been expected of me, but what I had earned, piece by piece, through quiet sacrifice and endless patience. I packed 2 suitcases and a duffel, booked a small studio 2 hours away, signed a lease online, and gave my notice to the landlord without flinching. He looked surprised, maybe even concerned, but I told him it was time for a change, and left it at that. There was no big announcement. No social media post. No cryptic messages or dramatic ultimatums. I didn't want closure. I didn't want confrontation. I just wanted out. And as I looked around the apartment one last time, its beige walls and two quiet hallways, I realized I wasn't mourning what I was leaving behind. I was mourning all the years I stayed for nothing. The key, hers, not mine, felt heavier than it should have, like it had absorbed the weight of every moment I had spent waiting to be chosen, to be noticed, to be prioritized. I placed it on the table, not in the center like something symbolic or poetic, but off to the side, where everything about me had always been placed, present, but not considered essential. I left no note, no letter, no final goodbye. Just the key and a silence so thick it could suffocate guilt, if they had any left. And then I walked out. There was no dramatic music, no tearful last glance, just the mechanical lock of the door clicking behind me and the sound of my footsteps down the hall, steady and sure. I didn't look back. Not once. Because I knew if I did, some small part of me might start rationalizing again, might begin the old habit of excusing their behavior, of telling myself they didn't mean it that way, that families are messy, that love looks different in different homes. But I was done translating disrespect into devotion. By the time they landed in Florida, or wherever that overpriced fantasy retreat had been booked, I was already on the road, my phone switched off, my mind clear. I hadn't told them where I was going, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I finally realized I didn't owe them the chance to follow. I had spent too many years letting them track my life like it belonged to them, stepping in when it was convenient, disappearing when it wasn't, always assuming I would remain exactly where they left me. This time, I wasn't going to be there when they looked. I rented a small place near the water, not a beach, but a quiet lake town where nobody knew my name and nobody asked where I came from. I unpacked slowly, savoring the emptiness of a place where I wasn't surrounded by shadows of unreciprocated loyalty. I bought a cheap chair for the porch, a plant that didn't need much sunlight, and a coffee mug that said absolutely nothing. And then I sat, listening to the wind through the trees, not waiting for anything for the first time in my life. The phone rang once, 2 days later. It was her number. I let it ring. I watched it buzz itself into silence, and I didn't move to touch it. She left no message that time. Maybe she was still on vacation. Maybe she didn't know what to say. Or maybe she thought I'd come back, like I always had before, like a satellite returning to its orbit, waiting for instructions. But I wasn't circling anymore. I'd burned that trajectory down to ash. It's funny, in a bitter sort of way, how easy it is to disappear when nobody's really looking. It's strange how quickly a person can become a villain in a story they were never invited to speak in, how effortlessly people rewrite events to cast themselves in the light and leave you in the shadows, and how, once you remove yourself from the roles they assigned you, silent supporter, fallback babysitter, dependable fixer, they panic not because you're gone, but because your absence forces them to confront the fact that they no longer have control over how you're remembered. It didn't even take a full week before the first cracks began to show, not in the form of apologies or accountability, but in the carefully worded messages passed along through aunts and cousins and mutual acquaintances who never really saw me. Only the role I played, the version of me they'd been fed for years like gossip disguised as family concern. At first, it was just polite confusion, subtle, almost laughably rehearsed lines that trickled into my inbox like rain through a leaking roof, small, but persistent. Your mom is really upset. She said you left so suddenly. Eric mentioned you haven't been answering calls. Is everything okay? You've always been the strong one. We're just surprised you didn't say anything before taking off like that. And then came the subtext, not even hidden but woven into the tone with surgical precision, the implication that I was ungrateful, overly emotional, perhaps even unstable. The kind of language families use when they want to discredit you without sounding cruel. No one asked what had led me to walk away. No one wondered aloud what kind of quiet accumulation of wounds would drive a grown woman to vanish from her own family's narrative. Instead, they simply accepted the new version being whispered behind closed doors, that I'd changed, that I'd always been distant, that I was the one rewriting history. But the truth, the real, ugly, unfiltered truth, was that I had never been the author of this story. I had merely been a footnote in everyone else's chapters, a reliable supporting character in the tragic comedy of Eric's life and the martyrdom fantasy my mother had crafted for herself. And now that I had dared to step off the page, to say nothing, to walk away without a fight, they had no choice but to create a new story that explained my disappearance in terms they could live with. Because admitting that I left out of self-respect would require them to confront the very things they spent decades avoiding. The version they preferred was simpler, more convenient, that I was bitter, that I'd always been too serious, that I held grudges, that I was emotionally unavailable. They dusted off old grievances, polished them with a fresh coat of hindsight, and presented them as proof that they had always tried their best, that I was simply hard to love. My mother, in particular, had a talent for this kind of narrative control. She had always been adept at making herself the victim, even when she held the knife. In her version, I was the cold daughter who left without warning, who abandoned her family over a simple misunderstanding, who couldn't bear to share the spotlight for once in her life. But she knew. Deep down, she knew. I had been sharing the spotlight my entire life, only there had never been one, not for me. I was the lighting tech behind the scenes, adjusting every switch so that Eric could shine brighter, so that my mother could bask in the illusion of maternal sacrifice, so that every broken thing in our family could be held together with the glue of my silence. And when I stopped providing that silence, when I simply left the stage, they called it betrayal, not liberation. What none of them understood, and what I wasn't about to explain, was that I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't interested in confrontation, in shouting matches, in dramatic letters sent with shaking hands. What I wanted was absence, my absence. I wanted the echo of my withdrawal to haunt their conversations, to sit with them during holidays and birthdays, to show up in the empty seat at the table and the unopened gift under the tree. I wanted them to feel the slow, gnawing discomfort of realizing that I was no longer there to absorb their chaos, to play mediator, to be the predictable one. And I knew, from the way their voices cracked on voicemail and from the way their texts turned sharper, shorter, more demanding, that it was working. But just when I thought the story had settled into silence, a new chapter appeared, not written in words, but in paper and ink. One day, without warning, a package arrived at my door, a plain manila envelope with no return address, no stamps, just a drop-off from someone who knew where to find me. Inside, there was only one item, a photograph. It was glossy, full color, clearly taken recently. My mother, my brother, and his kids were all smiling under a bright sun, posed on a wooden boardwalk with palm trees swaying behind them. The resort. The vacation I had never been invited to. The life they carried on living as if I had never existed. But it wasn't the photo that rattled me. It was what was written on the back, in sharp, slanted handwriting I recognized instantly Eric's. Just 4 words, scribbled without care, "Wish you were here." Not really. For a moment, I stared at it, waiting for anger, for hurt, for the rush of old wounds reopening like they always had in the past. But nothing came. No tears. No shaking. Just a kind of low, bitter amusement, the kind you get when someone shows their hand a little too clearly, forgetting that you already folded the game. It wasn't a message meant to draw me back, it was meant to sting, to remind me that they still had each other, and that I had chosen to be alone. But what Eric didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I wasn't alone. I had myself now. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in someone else's shadow, I wasn't managing anyone else's mess, I wasn't waiting to be acknowledged like some understudy in a life that wasn't mine. I had walked away not to punish them, but to save myself. And if the cost of that salvation was being misremembered, misrepresented, even hated, then so be it. Because there is a kind of peace that comes from no longer needing to defend your version of events, from letting people believe what they want if it means you finally get to rest. Let them rewrite the history. I was done reading it. It's a strange thing, the way peace arrives, not with fanfare or revelation, not with fireworks or some life-altering moment that changes everything in an instant, but with a long, slow exhale that creeps up on you quietly, like sunlight shifting across the floor in a room you've finally made your own. I remember sitting on the edge of that narrow porch in my new town, in a chair I bought for $30 from a local yard sale, listening to the soft, repetitive lapping of the lake water against the rocks below. And realizing I had gone an entire week without checking my phone, without refreshing a message thread, without bracing myself for the next emotional punch masked as a family update. There was no more waiting for permission to feel hurt, no more asking myself if I was overreacting, no more scanning through text messages, hoping to find something that resembled recognition. In that silence, I found something I didn't know I'd been searching for my entire life: ownership of my story, unfiltered by anyone else's guilt, need, or distorted recollection. But as with anything you walk away from, there's always a final test, a last lingering whisper from the life you left behind that arrives just when you think you've buried it deep enough not to hear it anymore. It came 3 months after I disappeared, in the form of a knock, sharp, deliberate, unmistakably human, at a door I had come to believe would never again echo with the past. I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to. Not because I was afraid, but because I had built something here, something fragile and mine, and I wasn't ready to see the look on someone's face who might try to take it away from me with just a few words. But curiosity is a persistent animal, and so, after a moment of hesitation, I stepped toward the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. Only a small envelope, thick and cream-colored, resting quietly on the welcome mat. No name, no return address. No markings at all except for the faintest indentation on the flap, as though someone had held it too tightly before letting it go. I brought it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at it for nearly an hour before finally opening it, expecting maybe another photograph, another cruel note, some final attempt at guilt. But there was no picture this time. No message. Just a check. A check, signed in my mother's handwriting, made out in my full name, middle name included, which she always insisted on using when she was trying to sound proper, for an amount that could only be described as absurd. Tens of thousands of dollars. The kind of number that doesn't appear without a lawyer or a motive. There was no note to explain it, no breakdown of what it was for. Just the check and the silence it carried with it. At first, I thought maybe it was hush money, some twisted way of saying sorry without ever saying it out loud, or perhaps worse, a way to bind me back to them by obligation, by the weight of a gesture that could easily be held over my head. I imagined my mother sitting at her dining room table, the same one I had once set for holidays no one ever thanked me for, deciding that this was how she would fix it, with money instead of a conversation, with numbers instead of names, with currency instead of memory. I didn't cash it. Not because I'm some paragon of virtue or because I didn't need the money, God knows, I did, but because doing so would mean acknowledging a transaction that should have never existed. I didn't leave for money. I didn't walk away from them so I could be bought back like a lost heirloom they suddenly remembered meant something. I left because I was tired of being the background, the cushion, the silent keeper of their messes, and no amount of money could make up for the years I spent stitching together my identity out of scraps of whatever they left behind. Days passed. Then weeks. And still no follow-up, no call, no second attempt at contact. And that was what told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't a test. It was a door slamming shut from their side, not mine. Maybe they thought sending money would be enough. Maybe they believed I'd take it and keep my distance, happy now that I'd finally gotten something out of them, as if all those years of neglect and erasure had ever been about anything as trivial as a bank account. But what they failed to grasp, what they never seemed able to grasp, was that my absence wasn't revenge. It was survival. I kept the check, tucked it into a drawer beneath a pile of old journals, not to remind myself of their failure, but as a sort of accidental monument to the version of me that used to believe closure had to come from the person who hurt you. That check, and signed by apology or explanation, said more than any phone call ever could. It was a confession written in numbers, a white flag without the decency of an admission. Now, every so often, when the world gets quiet and the sky bruises with a deep, dusky purple of late evening, I step outside and let the air fill my lungs in a way it never could when I was still tethered to the weight of their expectations. I don't think about them often. Not out of malice, but because I no longer need to. Their voices don't echo in my head anymore. Their stories, their excuses, their revisionist versions of me, they've faded into the background noise of a life I no longer live. And yet I know, without doubt, that they still talk about me. At birthday parties and holidays and awkward family gatherings, my name hovers in the air like smoke, unacknowledged but present, unavoidable in the way absence always is. Maybe my mother still tells people she doesn't know what happened, that I just changed one day. Maybe Eric still jokes that I finally snapped. Maybe they all agree that I was always a little different, in that tone people use when they don't want to admit someone simply got tired of being mistreated. But the beautiful thing about leaving without a dramatic exit, without a meltdown or a scene, is that it forces people to sit with the silence, to look at the space you once filled and realize they can't spin it into something that suits them. There's no voicemail to dissect, no text thread to show others, no angry words to quote. There is only the echo of your absence, and if they hear guilt in that echo, well, that's not your problem. So no, I never went back. I never called. I never wrote. I never offered explanations or demands. I never cashed the check. And I never gave them the one thing they'd counted on all along, the comfort of knowing I'd always be there, no matter how invisible they made me feel. Because in the end, the most powerful revenge is not fire or fury. It's walking away without needing them to see the smoke.